call this meeting of the Finance Committee to order. We have a number of general discussion items today. The first order of business, though, the housekeeping would be just to approve the minutes of our last meeting on the 6th of April.
Mr. Chairman, I had the opportunity to review these right before we came in today. They appear to be in order. They're fairly lengthy, but they looked correct to me.
Okay. Alderman Arnett?
Second that motion.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Mr. Finance Director, obviously we have sort of a series of events here from the CAFR, balance sheets, fund balance changes. How would you like to sort of approach these and lead us in a discussion?
Yeah, kind of like two groups of documents. The first group I like to put together is the what's called papers, and then we also put together a 3-year balance sheet, comparative, and then the capital itself. So the way I would like to take that conversation is these would be white papers, because that will provide a background as to what is important to the balance sheet and the capital itself. Then go into the 3-year balance sheet comparative, and then in some detail to the capital itself.
Great.
I also have a salary benefit sensitivity analysis that I did prepare, which is a totally different subject.
Sure.
So I can lead with that or conclude with that.
Yeah, unless anyone has a strong preference, we're happy to do it however you think makes the most sense. So.
Do that real quick and then
Okay.
get into the balance sheet.
Good, okay.
I won't spend a whole lot of time on this, but as part of the negotiations and put on this for the budget itself, what we did is in late November. Thank you. In late November, we did a data dump of all the positions and the people that were in those positions, and took the current information. So real quick, I have hid some of the names, but you'll see the department. You'll see the org number to which the expenses are charged, the hire date, and I'm just going to move one out, and the salary. And then for our purposes, what we wanted to know is what would happen if we did a step, or a COLA, and what would happen relative to each person. Well, it's not just the salary that we're looking at. It's the projected salary, which is one is the budgeted salary, which takes a day count of how many days a person would receive the COLA, and then the step, the new salary on an annualized basis, because then that would feed the following year. This is a three-year analysis. Then it took the FICA and Medicare, which is based as a percentage up here, 6.2 and 1.45 on the salary. Then we took the medical and RX. So if we wanted to do any type of increases, 1%, 5%, whatever that is, right now is constant at 1%. And what the impact for the projected employer share would be. We also were able to test the 80-20% allocation between the employer and the employee, which was very important given the conversations. So what we're looking at is each benefit. The dental, we have a dental plus, vision. Then we got into the state retirement. The employer share is 10.94, so any increase relative to a step or a COLA, whatever the case may be, we were able to then take the impact of that on the employer share. ICMA, if you participate, the different police and fire pension plans. Then we have the fire going out. Then you have the VEBA, and different depending upon when you were hired. So the VEBA at 3%, the VEBA at 1%. Again, this is all driven by salaries. If it says false, it means that you don't qualify and that you aren't participating in the program. And then the different employer benefits paid by employee benefits paid by the employer. So it takes each benefit and then goes down, and then provides the impact to what each change would include. So right now, I am working with the ASME group. So if we were to, for example, COLA would go up by 1%, you can see that the total impact would be $385,000. I mean $440,000, and then that would roll out the change in FICA, the change in Medicare, et cetera, et cetera. And so we did this for each union classification. So we were able to run sensitivity analysis for every single what-if scenario that was brought to the table. And I think Alderman Arnett may want to comment, but it really provided a transparency relative to what we were doing and what the overall impact would be for any proposal whatsoever. And then again, we were able to carry that out for 3 years. Just real quick, I'll bring you down.
Can you show the benefit load over base for each employee? Is that what we come to think of as 30% more than the base salary?
Oh. So let me do this. I'm going to change this back to 0. And so right now, hold on, I have different spreadsheets. Of course. I'm sorry, I did not load that one.
Okay, well, don't worry about it.
Okay.
But it would be interesting to see that, it would be interesting to see it across the group.
No, I do have a work paper that does show that. It's up over, in a lot of cases, 30%.
So in the management meetings to be behind the negotiations with the unions, our union lawyer was Steve Silvestri, and Mike Leahy has never done anything else for the city. Genuine, right? Michael Leahy. Oh. Michael phone. If Mike Leahy had ever done anything, never done anything for the city except connect us with Mr. Silvestri, he was worth his weight in gold. Because Silvestri is very sharp, very fair. I think he's the kind of person that Sheila would warm to immediately because he insisted that we be fair to everybody, the employees. He always touted the fact that employees are the resource that makes the city go, so we don't want to stint on our resources and so forth. But we started the negotiations in a very, very bad place. There was no trust, blood in everybody's eye, and he asked Bruce to do these spreadsheets, and he basically went into the table and said, look, anything we know, you know, and any modeling we can do, you can do it. Here it is. You can put in COLAs, you can put in steps, you can put in changing the employee-employer share of health benefits, all of those things. And so I think it just turned the whole flavor of the negotiations around because everybody was sitting at the table with everything. And our unions are very reasonable people. They get it that you can't kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. They totally get it. And particularly, we have some very smart people in fire who know all about the financial investments and they know how to use the spreadsheets. And I think certainly in the first IBB, we gained a great trusting relationship. We lost it with the second one, but I think this spreadsheet brought it back. And Lee Finney was telling the unions, don't negotiate, don't come to the table, you'll lose your bargaining power if you negotiate something in an election year. I was there when she told Carol Spriggs that, and they negotiated anyway, and they didn't use that election year leverage. And the only one we're not negotiated with, last I knew, is police, and that's over something that has nothing to do with the budget or pay or anything else. In fact, good. So I think this, besides being a good tool for us, so we can ask Bruce, what if we did this, or what if we did that? What if we did a COLA for just half the year? What if we did half the COLA for half the year? I think it was just huge in the negotiating. And you can see, this was all loaded from Munis, right? All the base data, yeah, right. So, I mean, it starts from every individual and gets loaded up to across the whole city. I assume you have a section in there for the exempt employees. So we have all employees. So anytime we make any change, we can see that by employees and across all employees. We can compare across the groups. You can be sure that police and fire were comparing themselves to each other, which is one of the big rubs that we have to deal with, but every city does. So it was a huge amount of work, but it was hugely important, and I think will remain important ever more in terms of us being able to understand what's going on and us being able to deal straight up with the unions and any of the economic portion of the negotiation. So, thank you, Bruce. You did a good job. And Silvestri thanked Bruce profusely on many occasions because it made his life a lot easier too.
No, it's very helpful to it's sort of the background on that and how it's amazing when you think about the logistics of being able to model the information, how, when you look back 3-4 years ago, how this was done, right? Where
Oh,
it was
yeah,
all,
right.
everyone came to the table with their own belief of what the numbers were, and it's hard to
Exactly.
convince someone unless you can show them, right?
Well, I give, you know, when we went from our previous software application, T4, then we brought in Munis. Melissa did a great job of being able to budget per person. But quite honestly, you couldn't do much sensitivity analysis. You couldn't do a what if. You did a 2%, 1%. And what I like about this, you can see in each category, expense category, what the impact would be by individual and by, and then the aggregate, sorted by department, sorted by bargaining group, sorted any way we wanted. So it really was a very, very good tool, if I can say so myself.
You can.
All right, transitioning, I like to, again, work with 3 documents. The first is the collaborative stewardship, this document. And again, I would like to start with this document because it kind of like establishes the importance of why we need to look at the balance sheet and not just a budget on an ongoing basis, because the balance sheet is whereas a income statement, a budget is, the measurement date is 1 year. The balance sheet is, it's where you're at. It doesn't go away. You don't erase the books at the end of a 12-month operating cycle. It is what it is. So it provides a great comparative to look through historically. Then what I like to do after we work through this is to go to a 3-year comparison that Melissa provided. And then on the back, just taking a few of the financial matrices, not all of them, that are outlined in the white paper, and then spend some time finally with the CAFR itself. I'd like to go through a little bit more detail than we normally do because I think we really jump and we don't spend enough time. So I don't want to spend too much time, but I would like to spend some time with the introduction and going through the different sections so that you all have a better understanding of what a resource the CAFR is. It has a lot of good information. I know it's dry in a lot of respects, but it does have some good information to resort to. All right, so back in 2015, the Financial Advisory Commission worked on this collaborative stewardship white paper. And what we did is we looked at different matrices, primarily from Standard & Poor's and the other rating agencies, but Standard & Poor's had the most accessible information base, and they were very helpful in helping tell us or pointing us to important concepts, if you will, what they think is important, what they look at. So a lot of this is, I want to say cut and paste from them, but it is very, very much dependent on what they gave us. I think, as everything, you know, we wrote the paper, but then kind of like shelved it. I think it's time to dust it off a little bit. I've been talking to Melissa and Nikki and staff. Now that we have a little bit more people, what we'd like to get going is more of a quarterly report, so that and include some of these matrices. The first topic, if you will, is corporate governance. Corporate governance is really how we operate the organization. It can be a bank, it can be any profit, not-for-profit organization. But basically the model includes the city code, the charter, the policies and procedures, And essentially what this really drives at is these policies and procedures really need to be documented. They need to be current. They need to be reviewed on an ongoing basis because it provides the oversight model for the entire organization. And it goes even further because it also talks about the human capital component and having the human capital. I mean, it's our most important investment that we make is the people that we hire, and having a focus on that that goes deep and provides a cultural type basis. What type of characteristics, core characteristics, et cetera, the core competencies that we want that human capital piece be. Talks about human capital assessment and accountability framework. Again, building that structure so that we have the right people in the right positions.
Before you go on, if I may, Chair, I think in the middle of the page, the second bullet, develop and maintain, and I underneath that,
Mm-hmm.
an annual strategic planning model identifying core functions, functional service levels, and performance budgets. That's our job, I believe, and we've never done it. And I think we suffer because we haven't done that. And I don't know how we drive it. We couldn't even get to agreeing on core values, let alone core services. So I think we kind of run around without any guidance because we have not done that. Or if the administration has this, they haven't let the council know what the strategic planning model is and these things. So I hope someday we will, before I get old and gray instead of young and pretty like I am now, that we're going to get to doing something like that. I think every employee and certainly all the policymakers have got to have that kind of guidance, and we just don't do it.
Well, as in any corporate governance, it starts from the top down. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, in that this is not just an administration function or responsibility. I don't mean to throw anybody underneath the bus, but it's also a council responsibility, if you will. We came pretty close with the program budgeting. Maybe we, again, why I bring this up, and I think it's timely, is because, it does force us to look at and evaluate and talk about, and see where we go from there.
And the second, again, and it's, I don't think I'll ever do it again, but the looking at the implications of the 5-year-out budget, we're toast. We always manage to seem in the short run to somehow overcome that structural deficit, but I don't know how much longer we can kick that can down the road. And that 5-year budget is the thing that is the canary in the coal mine that tells us that we're in trouble.
Alderman Arnett, this II is the capital plan, not the operating budget.
Oh, well, okay. Same thing. Ditto. We need an III. Or
So, again, and I look back X amount of years ago now, of where we started and where we are. But I think, it's important to keep goals in front of us so that, we can, improve, one step at a time, and keep that momentum and keep that discipline. The operational remedies, We want to, I think, at the time of this writing, we were pursuing a AAA bond rating. I think that's an important conversation unto itself, is what kind of rating do we want? Are we satisfied with a AA? Do we want a AAA? You know, what is it that we're in pursuit of? Because that conversation is going to have impact on our financial policies. For example, our debt policies, our working capital policies. So I think that's something that we always want to be mindful of and probably include in our annual budget process is, you know, what is it that we're trying to pursue, or reaffirm that every year.
It jogs something I've wondered about in the past when every so often when we do these, you know, we meet with the different rating agencies and then we get these announcements of what's happening. I mean, in the time I've been on the council, sort of since the 2008, 2009 economic situation, I mean, have we seen municipal ratings change? I mean, are there as many AAA communities as there were before, or has there been a sort of a change, just like everything else from rating agencies has changed how they, you know, sort of how they treat things? Has there been is there a sense sort of outside of us and other communities, other city councils, city elsewhere, that there's more AAA communities than there used to be, there's less,
Since the 2008
yeah.
timeline, there are less, and they're not getting back to those levels because as quickly, or quickly I should say, because there's the underwriting requirements that led to that. Rating agencies are undoubtedly a little bit more sensitive to it, but there are new financial components, if you will, that they're evaluating, specifically OPEB and pension. Those two
So-
issues are,
So it's on both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
It's,
yeah.
and those are all, and that, I mean, that was my assumption, but right, that in some ways those are all sort of more truthful ways to be accounting things, right? Like it just makes it harder than where people were in 2005, 2006, right?
Well, the other thing also is, if you remember, the huge decline in property values.
Sure.
And most municipalities are driven by, if not entirely, majority by real estate tax. And when your values plummet like they did, there are some communities that are still hamstrung because of those declines and the sensitivities that go with that. You take a look at the number of communities or municipalities that filed bankruptcy.
Sure.
During that time frame. You know, I think we're all pretty familiar with most of them. We take a look at communities going to pension obligation bonds and how some of those worked and some did not work well. So, you know, all in all, I think the city of Minneapolis is doing very well as compared to other communities, and I think we've rebounded quicker than most. You know, if you take a look at the rating agencies' reports, they speak to the strengths
Sure.
that are external of any of us, the economy, the surrounding economy, the values of the property, how they rebound, somewhat insulated, the unemployment rates, all those drivers are part of our city's rating. But the ultimate test is our collaborative and collective efforts to keep discipline and principled financial.
Thank you. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I know it was a bit off topic. I was just curious about it. So I mean, I guess the question is, when this was drawn up, from your perspective, is this idea that you want to get to a AAA bond rating, and we need to basically do that as sort of the driver of our strategy, that the FAC is sort of recommending? I mean, is that as much a focus, or is it more about just sort of not not going backwards, or, you know, not, I mean, like, sort of.
I would always
how should we
like
look
to
at it?
think that we're improving.
Sure.
I think if we are become satisfied to where we are, that invites a regression. I think if you continue to, you know, put goals and objectives forward, I think, you know, and I keep going back to feeling a strong fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayer. Let's do what's right for the taxpayer. And I think we owe it to the taxpayer and the residences to pursue those goals. You know, fundamentally, it's, you know, now, a lot of times, you know, that can put stress on the taxpayer, so there's some unintended consequences to that. For example, you know, when our rates in water and sewer were not covering the expense, we had to increase, you know, which put a burden on the ratepayer. We had to occasionally cut services. You know, that has an adverse impact. So it's a two-edged sword, of course, but I think if we do it in a principled way, I think, you know, we can get there.
So staying at the strategic level, and you mentioned several times real estate, and that's clearly the key to the city's financial well-being, at least on the revenue side. I've been reading a lot about the Trump tax reform proposals, and one of them is to...
It's fake news, isn't it?
Pardon?
It's fake news, isn't it?
It might be fake news. I hope it's fake news, because one of them is to dramatically increase the standard deduction and take away the home mortgage
Right.
write-off. And I think in the long term, most analysts are saying that's going to have a very negative impact on property values. And so if we're thinking 5 years out and we're trying to worry about, like Henny Penny, what the next piece of sky to fall is, who does that kind of strategic thinking in the city, or do we just sort of wait for it to evolve and then we...
Well, I think between the ICMA, the GFOA, that's quite frankly who you know, our department relies on relative to what the headwinds are going to be. And the stronger those headwinds become, right now, you know, it's a, I mean, there are telltale indicators that it potentially could come, but as those issues become more concrete and finite, then yes, they have to be brought forward as part of the conversation.
So we all go to the GFOA meetings to get updated on that?
You are always welcome. But you know, but at the same sense, it's hard to, what am I trying to say? We don't want to be too reactive either. Right,
I
exactly.
think just like OEM does all of these simulations and everything, I think it is an interesting process, at least for the Finance Committee or those members of the Finance Committee that want to torture themselves. What if it's something else that has a big impact on our property values, like sea level rise? And how are we going to deal with those long-run strategies? I think sea level rise is more certain than Trump tax reform, but I don't have the sense that we even get into those scenarios. I frankly think our big economic downturn in the budget had relatively small amount to do with the financial meltdown. I think we were headed to a train wreck in the city anyway, because we had already taken all the money out of our reserves, and that's why we were borrowing $10 million at a time to pay for salaries and vendors. And I'm not sure how much of that really was. It was just coincidental with the economic, and maybe it was abetted, but I think we were headed there anyway.
Well, it only put additional pressure on it because it did two things. It lowered values, so the rate had to go up, and two, I think it put a spotlight on the pension plan and what those issues were. but it definitely had a negative impact on the city's cash flows and fund balance, that's for sure. And, you know, again, I know I'm going off topic, but it also undermined our relationships with the rating agencies. Because, you know, it was not, the outcomes were not quite what they were expected and, or what they were led to believe. So in all of this, I think it's just, you know, we talk about all the time, transparency with what we're doing and why we're doing it. So getting down to the core financial functions of the city, basically we're looking at broad categories, and quite frankly, each one of these can be improved, and I think we are, but we can continue in that direction. The financial reporting, the budget implementation and oversight, and what we're talking about now is balance and off-balance sheet management. The risk management, we have come a long way. You know, Mary O'Brien has done a fantastic job. I think now we have to expand the scope of risk management to evaluate citywide risk management and not just, you know, what the traditional model is, i.e. insurance and that kind of thing. Employee and labor relations, and then the economic strength, which is definitely overlapped with the county and state. If we can turn the page, we definitely are looking at, again, Melissa and I were talking this morning in pretty much detail, what we can do to improve the monthly, quarterly, and annual financial reporting, getting that more of a discipline with the Finance Committee and with the Financial Advisory Commission. And then we get into the specific matrix that we want to evaluate and think about. And what we thought as part of the financial reporting is to do it by fund and have some or all of these ratios so that when we meet on a regular, you know, those bases, to go through it, and then we can create a historical timeline perspective as we go forward, and we can see what we're doing and good and what we're not doing so well, and make those improvements. Like anything, you know, borrowing some of Ross's, you know, having a timeline and comparing changes tell you what you need to refocus on. The first thing we talk about revenues. We've been talking about alternative revenue sources probably before, you know, I got here. You know, I know the Blue Ribbon Committee, I think it was called, came up with some ideas and some thoughts on that. But we talk about constant yield and constant levy, constant tax rate, trying to put more definition relative to what our thoughts are on those. I would never recommend a tax cap because it's one of the first things that the rating agencies, because you're taking away your flexibility. And you don't have to raise the tax rate, but if you limit yourself, you're tying your hands behind your back relative to some functionality. So that's one, you know, budgetary flexibility is a big component. I'm not saying go hog wild either. And then we keep talking about fees and how they should be correlated to costs. And that's just a discipline that I know it's difficult because we get into increasing those fees and then we talk about the equity and some other issues relative too. So I know there's more than one side of the analysis that has to be done. One-time revenues, we've done a lot of work relative to fund balance and using retained earnings, et cetera, and other one-time. So we're developing that as we talk, those policies as we talk. The policy requiring a percentage of fund balance as a percentage of revenues or expenses. a budget development policy. I think we've taken great strides for that. If we can turn the page. Management of the balances and off-balance sheet categories is essential to our success. What we should be looking at is cash, be it an acid test, liquidity test, and working capital versus retained earnings or working capital is back to what was said earlier. We had to borrow $10 million 2 years in a row as we got our taxes, and then when we got our property taxes, we were able to pay those off. We were also using bond proceeds that we should never have used to pay operating expenditures. If there was a simple liquidity testing, working capital test that was established and done on a regular basis and provided to the city council, reported to the city council on a regular basis, the city could have avoided that, very simply put. And I'm not trying to disparage any prior, but just saying, if those thresholds were reflected, steps could have been taken to correct the problem before it became overly problematic. We talked about accounts receivables. If you're not managing the receivables and those balances tend to increase, you're leaving revenue on the table, number one, and number two, as we all know it, the longer those receivables are outstanding, the harder it is to collect. Our collections are relatively straightforward and easy, and we do have a few problematic ones, but most of our receivables we can give to the county for tax title, and tax title is a very effective way to collect outstanding fees and whatnot, but it's something that has to be looked at and evaluated on an ongoing basis. Accounts payable, it's more on the expense side. Debt, we talked about, and just maintaining debt policies and making sure that you do it on not only a fund basis, but an aggregate basis too. Right now, I do think we do a pretty good job evaluating both. We're taking a look at revenue bonds, which I think was a very good step. So I think we're moving in the right direction. Problematic, I think, area will continue to be pension and OPEB. I think once we get into the CAFR, this will become pretty self-evident. You'll see that we have a negative $45 million equity position, and that's because of deferred outflows. And again, we'll get to that later on. But pension and OPEB are critical, and we talked about it earlier this year. And come August, July and August, try to spend some time relative to what our assumptions should be going forward. For example, there's two things. One, we have not organizationally worked with our actuarial firm to go through all the assumptions and say, this is valid, this is not valid, we should increase or decrease, change, whatever, and really have an understanding of what it is, and that the assumptions that that what they're using, our actuarial firm is using. I bet if we go around the table, myself included, not all those assumptions are known and or understood, and that's really no way to run the ship, if you will. The biggest piece of that is our internal rate of return assumption. It's 7.5% today, and depending upon who you speak to, that's high. As an industry, municipal level, they're recommending under 7%. it's going, any change is going to be very difficult to absorb within the budget, because if you're saying that you're going to earn 7% on $150 million versus 7.5%, well, even those basis points will have a major impact on an actuarial basis on how quickly that $150 million grows to pay future benefits. So, you know, some are saying that it's going to go down to, you should be down 4.5%, 5%. But I think that's overly aggressive. Now, we just went and did a procurement on our financial advisor, if you will, for the pension plan. And one of the consultants said 7.5%, if you're all in equities over the duration, is defensible. The three others said it's not defensible. So even within the industry, which is I'm trying to say is, there are different opinions relative to how realistic that 7.5% is. But we haven't reached it. We did not reach, no. So again, I think that's something that we're going to have to pay more attention to. We talked about fund balance and retained earnings for a long time now. Off-balance sheet items.
Fund balance, we had a very elaborate proposal from the financial advisors about segmenting the fund balance. I think that was something Mr. Leahy was going to do. I think we do need to do it.
I will say this, it will probably be done by the end of next week.
Wonderful.
So,
Who's the victim?
I am.
Oh, God. Just what we need. You doing another.
If it's going to be done, it just needs to get done. And right now, as we evaluate the departments, you know, there's now a heavy lift at this juncture, so I might be able to get to it. Off-balance sheet items, you know, we talk about pending labor contracts, but there are a lot of other off-balance sheet items that we need to be aware of, pending litigation being the big one. But anything that, and this is the importance of just the communication from the administration up, is what pending issues are out there that could negatively impact the city's financial health.
Do you have actual numbers for any given year, litigation numbers?
Yes.
You do?
I'm sorry?
I just wanted to know if you had
Okay.
that.
No,
that
we do.
information.
Yeah,
Is it
right.
available? Okay.
We created a line number in the budget,
Okay.
not in the budget, but in the income statement for any settlements. So all we have to do is run a report on that account. We talked about risk management assessment. We talked to our external auditors and talking about doing a citywide risk assessment, and then from there looking at doing an internal audit, drill down in those areas that are highlighted, and we just have to get back to that. We talked about human capital strategies, and then rating agencies place the greatest weight on economic strength. So the importance of maintaining and doing anything that we can do to promote economic development will greatly leverage the city's financial stability. So so on that, real quick, just to conclude, some of the matrices that we should be taking a look at are occupancy rates, the number of building permits that we issue, commercial versus residential valuations. So these are just areas that point to our economic condition, and we'll try to work with the planning and zoning department to dovetail this analysis within the general presentation. And Melissa has agreed that by next week, she'll have this done. By next quarter.
Question?
All right.
Yeah, some of these are, like establishing goals for diversifying the tax base.
Yes.
That's kind of like a council level discussion maybe, not a planning and zoning discussion.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, we,
Is that coming to a theater near us anytime in the future?
I think the first 3 years that I got here, that was a big conversation, especially with the Financial Advisory Commission, as to how, i.e. one, new revenue sources, and two, how do we diversify the tax base? Again, I think you're right. We need to sit with planning and zoning and have a strategic perspective, and it's probably something that we should put on the table, either as a work session or something. But if we could use this I think there's a lot of good ideas within the document. We just have to manage to do it. Yes.
Questions or comments on the document and the recommendations?
It hasn't
Good job.
changed.
Oh,
It hasn't changed in years, nor have we.
There you go.
This really lays it out nicely. Thank you.
yes, thank you. All right. Finally, the moment we all have been waiting for, I guess, is the CAFR. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm into. So Melissa compiled this information, so I'm going to let her speak to it. But the intent was just to give you a broad idea of the city's general fund. It doesn't incorporate all funds, but just give you an idea of where we've been. And on the back of it, it takes a look at some of the ratios that we're talking about.
Good afternoon. So the single sheet that you have handed out is the balance sheet, and it covers the last 3 fiscal years, FY 14, 15, and 16. There are several changes that can be pointed out, so if you have additional questions or I skipped over something, just let me know. For FY 16, the first category, the assets class, the total assets were $43.2 million. When you compare this to fiscal year 14, you can see that's about a $20 million decrease. There's several reasons for that, but without going into too much detail, in FY 14 we had categories called due to, due froms. It's just reporting purposes. And then when we moved to fiscal year 15, the due to, due froms were actually pulled cash. So those were eliminated and the cash was categorized appropriately. So if you look at proprietary funds, for example, you'll see that their cash position increased from 14 to 15, and their due to, due froms decreased. So it's just reporting, different way of reporting it.
Is the implication that we have far fewer assets than we used to have?
No.
Why are the numbers so different then?
Well, if you increase your assets and increase your liabilities, the net impact is going to be.
Yeah, but liabilities don't seem to change that.
You discuss that.
They changed about the same. Okay,
Yeah.
so that really, the $20 million is an accounting artifact?
Basically.
Take a look, okay, not to take over the conversation, but due to, from, fourth line down in assets are $23 million in 2014. If you go down, same column under liabilities, due to other funds is $22 million. So your assets are overstated by $23.8 million, and your liabilities are overstated by 22.4. So that, your assets, after you net out your assets and liabilities, It's a $1 million difference.
So your liabilities also
So how come
decrease.
we end up with a $15 million
Unassigned?
due from other funds in 15, but the other funds are saying there's nothing due to?
So that's part of pulled cash, and I apologize if I'm not explaining it correctly, but it's a little complicated. If you go back to the previous year CAFRs and you look at the cash positions in transportation, dock fund, market fund, off-street parking fund, you'll notice that they have negative cash balances. And that would actually be a due to general fund, because all the cash in prior years was reported in the general fund. There was also a line called equity and pooled cash if you look at the statement of cash position. So by pulling it out of the general fund and properly allocating it to those enterprise funds, they no longer have those funds that actually had cash that was sitting in general fund now has the cash sitting in the proprietary funds. But for those funds that actually had negative cash, they're still showing up as due from other funds. So there's a section in the CAFR in the notes to financial statements that actually lists the funds that owe cash to the general fund. And that would be transportation, off-street parking, dock fund. So jumping forward to FY16, you'll notice like the cash and cash equivalent line item on here, FY15 was 18.6 million, and in FY16 it dropped to 5.9 million. That was because we consolidated the dock and market funds, and we also gave the transportation department a subsidy to zero out their deficit. Right, accumulated deficit. So that was a $10.5 million cash decrease in itself from those three funds.
Okay. But in the due from other funds line, you've got a $15 million asset. Where is the offsetting liability?
This is general fund, so those liabilities
Got
would
it.
be.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
other
Never
funds.
mind.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Okay. Okay,
You know, this is lovely, but I've got a million questions just on the stub. So is that a one-on-one? Like, what's the difference between cash equivalents and restricted cash?
that's an easy question.
Well, what I would recommend, if it works for everybody, I think 90% of your questions will be answered as we roll through the CAFR.
Okay.
And if there's anything that remains, we can definitely one-on-one, or if you have time, be more than happy to get into the details.
Okay. So I guess the biggest item under the asset category would be the large decrease from FY15 to 16, which was, like I just mentioned, the dock market consolidation and the subsidies to transportation. The restricted cash is actually all of your bond proceeds, unspent bond proceeds. So if you look at the restricted cash number and then you go down to fund balance restricted for capital projects, those are actually the same numbers. Then you have your receivables due from other funds, which I just went over, inventories, prepaid items. So your total assets for FY16 was 43.2 million. Going down to liabilities, there really wasn't any big change from 15 to 16, other than when you look at FY14, you see that 22.4 million, which is no longer there in 15 and 16. So your total liabilities was 4.4. Then you have your deferred inflows of resources, which is your unavailable revenue. This is long-term assets that are not currently available, almost $202,000. And then going into your fund balance, over the last 3 years, the non-spendable for inventories and prepaid items, this stayed about the same for the last 3 fiscal years. The restricted for the following items: community development, capital projects, capital reserve fund, and budget stabilization fund. Capital projects has always been a line item. These are, again, all of your unspent bond proceeds for capital projects. The capital reserve fund and budget stabilization fund, those are new for FY16, and these were put in place by Resolution R915. The capital reserve fund was a one-time funding of $5 million to get it started, and then in future fiscal years, 50% of your revenues over expenditures, if there's a surplus, 50% of that will be allocated to this capital reserve fund as long as the city is within their 15% unassigned fund balance threshold. The budget stabilization fund, again, implemented with R915. This is 50% of the revenues over expenditures, operating revenues over expenditures. And then this line item will actually go up to 3% of government-wide expenditures. So from the first year, as you'll see as Bruce goes through the CAFR, the 1.5 million was 50% excess revenues over expenditures from FY16. And then the unassigned fund balance is $15.8 million. This is about 24% of general fund expenditures. The target is, or the minimum amount is 10%, and the policy, or the ceiling is, target, sorry, is 15%. So right now, 24.01%, or the city's doing pretty good. And you'll notice the big change from FY15 to 16, and again, that was due to the consolidation of dock and market funds and the transportation subsidy.
Could you do me a favor and send me an email in writing explaining the transfer to the transportation fund?
Sure.
And the whys and wherefores and how that worked? Because I'm going to have to end up explaining it, and I'd rather not do it just waving my hands.
Yeah, actually,
The dock and market funds, I think I understand, but this one don't have as good a grip on.
and I've asked the same, so what we're going to do is put a schedule together that walks each component part
Okay.
with all the different funds, so you can see how it all was derived, because people are going to want to know. No. Rich,
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so real quick, sorry, your total fund balance is $38.5 million. All right, on the next side, page 2,
That's only the general.
it's just general fund. This is, yep.
How much, do you know off the top of your head, across all the enterprise funds, what that fund balance is?
Well,
It's about the same size?
as a ratio?
No, just,
No, well, that's all.
oh, in the CAFR, okay.
Yeah, yeah. We just wanted to, I thought it would be a good idea, just so you could see a little bit of a comparison.
Okay, so on the flip side of that sheet are financial metrics, some of them that Bruce just went over in the report. Again, this is strictly general fund. The first one is taxes receivable collected as a percentage of the total tax levy. There are several analyses that can be done for accounts receivable, but given that property tax is the largest revenue source for the city, we just focused on taxes. The current year tax receivable that was collected was $39.8 million. The total tax levy was a little over $40 million. So the city's collection rate was 99.36%. Accounts payable as a percent of cash, the outstanding accounts payable as of June 30th was $1.86 million. The cash and cash equivalents was almost $6 million. So the accounts payable as a percentage of cash is 31.12%. Debt service as a percentage of expenditures, the total debt service, which is principal and interest paid over FY16, was $6.1 million. Expenditures, $65.8 million. So the debt service as a percent of expenditures is 9.3. This target is 10%, and the ceiling is 12%. So the city's still within the target threshold. And lastly, unassigned fund balance as a percent of expenditures, which I just went over, was 24%.
So what about our receivables that are other than the real estate tax? What's our collection rate look like on those?
It's closer to about 97%.
Okay.
But, and again, we did this kind of like late, but we intend in the future to break all that out so that you can see by receivable classification what those rates are. unlike the real estate tax, because we do have a pretty good collection process, as I mentioned earlier, we do have a allowance for capital accounts with the others, so in case we do have to write it off, it's not one big hit, it's
Right.
been,
You know, I understand that, and I was just focusing on that because receivables getting out of control is one of the ways you get in trouble.
and most definitely, yes.
So, in a future report, can we have not only what the actual percentages are, but what the targets are?
Yes.
That would be,
Right. This is definitely gonna be, you point out, this is gonna be a work in process. Anything that you think, from a managerial perspective, that you wanna see and what you want it to grade, please let us know. We can, put dollars in, we can do much of anything.
Okay.
All
Any
right.
other questions or comments on this?
All right,
Thank you.
I'll try to move quickly, but quite honestly, I wanted to spend a little bit more time than we historically have done with the CAFR, because it seems like we always rush through it. Unless you are somewhat inclined for this type of discussion, it leaves a lot of people to complete boredom and desire to leave. So trying to balance those two sides, I will spend more time, but maybe not to the depth. But again, if we want to get into any details later on, I'd be more than happy to do it. So we start with the introductory section. And I recommend that for general background, this introductory section, which includes the transmittal, the GFOA achievement, which I have to plug for the department, and then the independent auditors report, it provides great information. I would also point you to the official statements, which are part of any bond issuance. Again, it provides a lot of redundant information, but good information nonetheless. Clifton Larson is our external audit firm. They started with the city after they did the forensic audit on the bond proceeds. So we've had a pretty good relationship with them. They are a good organization. The only frustration, quite honestly, I have with them is getting this thing done on a timely basis. But beyond that, it's a quality firm. We talk about the profile of government. If you take a look on page 3, we talk about long-term financial planning. Again, a lot of redundant themes, if you will, relative to what we just walked through. And the awards and acknowledgements, again, just if you turn to page 6, the city has received the Certificate of Achievement in Financial Reporting for a long time, and it's something that I think it takes a lot of work, quite honestly, and not every municipality earns this. By way of comparison, only two municipalities out of 350 some in Massachusetts have received this award when I was up there. So it's to be coveted. You'll see on page 8 the independent auditors report, and I bring you to page 9 where it gives the opinion. It is unqualified, which meaning that there are no qualifications relative to any findings or concerns. It basically reads the financial statements are presented fairly. It will never say accurately or something definitive, because they won't go that far. But they are fairly presented. If there was a qualification, they would note the qualification. If it was a disclaimer, they basically say the financial statements can't be relied on. So there's different levels. So we got the highest level of financial report. And then there's an MD&A starting on page 9. Again, I think it will give you some financial highlights. And it talks about the different statements, the government-wide financial statements, and what that means. The statement of net position versus a balance sheet, for example. The statement of net position shows you all assets. The balance sheet doesn't include land, property, and that kind of stuff. So they do have a little difference of presentation. And then it talks about different funds. So, and this is all this information that is part of the MD&A. It has detail, which I'll get to right now. So if you turn to the financial statement section of the what Melissa went through earlier, now you can see that this is expanded out, if you will. Again, page 19. So, and this is a compilation as of June 30th, 2016. Again, a balance sheet is an ongoing, it's a permanent, your land doesn't go away. Your assets do not go away. Your liabilities, unfortunately, don't go away, right? So the measurement is always as of some certain date, whereas a income statement is through a period of time, typically not to exceed 12 months. So the asset classifications are the assets. I won't go through each. The governmental activities, and then we talked about business type activities, and then the totals. The business activities are the enterprise funds. So non-current assets of almost $40 million for the government. General business type is 31 for a total of $71.1 million. And then,
Why don't the numbers match?
because again, it's a different presentation. Things are rolled up.
No, some of the numbers match
Right.
from what you will see.
This is the confusing part of the
Yeah, tell me.
financial reporting, because again, right. We'll get there, but when we get to the notes will tell you there's going to be some reconciliations, but it will also tell you what the different bases of accounting are. And you take a look at governmental activities, okay, that's a modified accrual basis of accounting, whereas the enterprise funds business type is an accrual basis of accounting. So it can, if you're not accustomed to looking at this, and even if you are accustomed to looking at it, it can get quite confusing.
I'm just
Okay,
talking.
well, a simple question is the current assets and governmental activities is 40 million. In Melissa's balance sheet, it's 43.
Right.
What's the difference?
When it's all
Where's the 3 million?
to the equity and pooled cash is
Because all the non-current assets in this balance sheet in the CAFR look like land, buildings, and construction in progress.
some of the numbers are identical, some of the numbers are distinctly different.
Yeah, without actually going through, like my notes, my lead schedules to go through this, I don't want to tell you the wrong thing, but what I just showed you and went over with you is on page 21. And so page 21 is the balance sheet, page 22 is the reconciliation of the balance sheet for the governmental funds to net position and governmental activities. So page page 19, page 21, and page 22, they kind of all have to be taken hand in hand for them to reconcile. If that helps you at all.
No. Let me do this.
If you-
On page 22, for example,
It has your net position,
right.
which is on page 19.
22 tries to reconcile the two different presentations.
Right.
Does
I
it
don't know how
actually do it?
It
how
does
good
reconcile it. The net position's tie, so it is correct.
Okay.
I mean, we can go through each of those if you would like, but.
No, not today.
Yeah.
Let's do it this week.
Yes. Well, we
Bruce will
don't-
be available.
Yeah.
He's already said he's not doing anything.
He's got work to do on the boat.
Yeah, right, work party. Okay, so, if, just from a historical perspective, if you look at a financial, very simplistic terms, if you were to look at a balance sheet, probably about 20 years ago for a municipality, what you would be looking at is on page 21. Very simplistic, very, but with the advent of GASB 34, I believe, we had to start talking about recording assets, okay? And so that's when we started to report land, buildings, improvements, and other things, and started getting some depreciation. So that's why the statement of net position was created basically to provide that level of information. I think there's two things I would like to point you to, is deferred outflows of resources. It's in the middle of page of 19. For those who worked in private industry, you would be more accustomed to looking at a balance sheet similar to page 19. But what I want to bring you to is that deferred outflows related to pensions, and then the deferred loss on refunding. The deferred loss on refunding is when we refunded the bonds. But if you go down to the liabilities section, we have the city pension liability.
Before you move off this, how is a deferred outflow an asset and not a liability?
It's part of your liability section. If you take 140...
On here,
I'm sorry,
deferred
yes.
outflow of resources
You're-
is here as an
right,
asset.
Right, 145 plus the 20. It's just, it's the model. I don't know what else to tell you. Because what you haven't done is you haven't recorded the expense yet. It's a deferment.
Okay.
I'll get you more
So we're
information.
Okay.
Yeah, I still get used to this presentation. It's backwards to what I normally think, but again, what I would like to point you to is that if you take a look at your net position, unrestricted net position, negative $45 million. It's not exact, but that number is essentially the city pension liability plus the police and fire pension liability added together. The city pension liability, that's the state of Maryland, our state of Maryland liability. That is a new reporting requirement.
What is that? Gadsby
68.
68?
Yeah.
Right. And there's some even more onerous ones on the horizon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It is, it's not getting easier, it's going to continue to be more onerous.
So is I'm sorry to back up here, but I'm still trying to noodle this out. Is the 18 million in deferred outflows related to pensions
Yes.
So further,
embedded in essentially as an offset in the city pension liability and the police and fire pension liability?
yeah, that's a good way of looking at it, actually. If you go into the notes section, note 6 actually starts on page 45, but there's several pages on the pension, on both state pension and the police and fire pension.
Okay.
Page 47 shows the deferred outflows and inflows for the state plan. They give you actually a lot more information. The state provides this, all jurisdictions with this information. And then page 53 shows the deferred outflows of resources and inflows for the police and fire pension plan. These are, I guess, provided by the actuarial, and it's also, you also find it in the valuation report.
Okay.
But the largest piece of the outflows is the difference between the projected earnings and the actual earnings. For the pension plan, I can't really speak to the state plan because I don't have all their information, but for the police and fire pension plan, when you take the actual rate of return, which is 7.5%, and then what we actually earned, which was negative 0.08%, that's a large difference. $13.4 million was for that alone as part of the outflows for the police and fire pension. So there's a lot of information in that note.
Okay, thanks.
Are the drops in here too, the liability for the drops?
That was part of the pension. I'll verify that, but I believe that's how we rolled it up. Because it was materially, it wasn't that big of a number to,
It's going to be.
it will be, yes.
Yeah. In the negotiations, I assume we didn't do anything with drops for the 1 year, but it's going to be coming up again on the, because the drop is supposed to be budget neutral?
I think anything related to the negotiations, I'd rather not discuss, if you don't mind. Because, again, some of it's not, hasn't been finalized.
Sure.
All right, so continuing,
Just on page 19 or one of the other ones, how do, is that, say under business activities, this unrestricted, which is positive? What is that?
what page are you?
I'm on page 19, that's the one I happen to land, where we have the negative 45, but on the business type activities, we have a plus 6.4.
So for business type activities, you have to consider the only pension obligation in the enterprise funds is the state pension plan, which is a lot less than the general fund, police and fire. So if you go up and then you'll see city pension liability is 2.1 million in business type activities. And then you compare that to the general fund, which has a liability of 14 million for the state plan and 30 million for the police and fire pension plan. Those two together in itself are what create a negative unassigned fund balance, because that all feeds down into your fund balance. So if you take that out, your unassigned fund balance would be a lot different.
Another question. How does this city have a liability towards the state pension plan?
For the state pension plan?
Yeah.
Because we have to pay those benefits associated with our employees. The new GASB rules require that that liability be allocated to each municipality for which is a participant.
So this liability is related to the city's portion of the state plan, because annually the employers contribute and the city contributes every year for
So
the
this
plan.
is a city contribution that we haven't paid yet?
This is the portion of basically essentially the unfunded liability.
Right.
How we have the same unfunded liability for the police and fire. So if we had different municipalities as part embedded in our police and fire pension, we would give their
Right.
allocation.
Well, so I guess what I'm groping for is, it sounds like this isn't a state pension plan after all, if we end up having liability out of it.
Well, we're part of the state plan, so it's my retirement versus.
Well, no, I know,
Yeah,
we're in a plan that is called a state
Right.
plan. But apparently, the state of Maryland has said, no, we're not gonna underwrite the whole plan.
they did. When GASB 68 came out, that's exactly what they did. And they sent us the bill.
Got it. Thank you.
And they sent it to the teachers' unions.
Yes, everybody.
Yeah, anybody
Mhm.
who's not directly a state
Right.
employee who's
Yep.
in the plan.
Mhm.
So,
Okay, that's,
yeah,
that answers my question, thank
Yeah.
you.
so it's just dovetail, it's gonna put a lot of pressure, or should put some thought process locally relative to what some strategies and options should be considered.
Well, I mean, we've been having discussions for a number of years about police and fire pension plan, and what the reality of this is we need to start talking about everyone else as well, because it is sort of on the same plate.
Well, thinking about that a little bit further, how did the state invest money too, right? To earn?
Same model.
So how did they earn compared to us last year, say, where we did the .0,
Well,
whatever it was?
they
0.0
did better, but as you know, it's not just the return on investment that drives it. Where we're contributing 18% now, we're contributing 10.94% on the state plan.
Yeah.
So we're really talking apples and oranges relative to what the different strategies are.
But thinking of strategies, I've always thought it would be good if we could give police and fire to the state, but maybe what we ought to do is get out of the state and put us in our own pension plan. Because the state has really flaky assumptions, and they extend the liability out over 100 years. I mean, they're in much riskier position than we are. That's another topic for another day, which we...
That's what I mean. It forces local governments to have a conversation relative to long-term options. All right, if I can, if you turn to page 23.
You said 5-3?
23. yeah. This is the income statement for the governmental funds, and I guess just to highlight the general fund. And then you'll see a little bit of the information that we alluded to about the market, transit, and dock funds. But total revenues were at $68 million. Total expenditures were at 65. So we net revenue was $3 million. Then after that, the dock fund reduced the equity position by 1.7 million. The market house by 700,000. The transit by $5 million. The transfer in was from the parking fund, which we then sent out to the transit department, and then all the transfers out of $3 million. You want to say anything?
But we don't give all of the parking revenues to transportation. We do 2.4 out of the 3 million.
Well, some stay within the parking fund to pay for operations of that. But the net falls to the payback prior year subsidies, falls to the general fund, and then we just wash that to the transportation fund. Now I'd like to get into a little conversation relative to the proprietary funds. Again, statement of net position, which is the assets and liabilities, and the equity section. So the water, sewer, off-street parking, transportation fund, you see zeros in the dock fund. Then there's a conversation on non-major enterprise funds. Non-major is just that, those that aren't going to have a material impact on financial presentations, so they're rolled up. And then the total, we'll get to that. So I would like to turn the page to the statement of revenues. The water fund, sewer fund, off-street parking all had positive revenues. The exception was the transportation fund by approximately $1 million. So then you'll see that the transfers in of 7.479, that was the transfer, including $938,000 deficit that had to be made to the transportation fund to kind of like net out prior year deficits. So then, I haven't forgotten your question, Ross. The fiduciary funds, the one fiduciary fund is a pension trust, and it just gives what the investments are in the net position of 157 million. I'm sorry, on page 28. So you'll see basically what the, in a roll-up presentation, how the pension trust is invested, what different types of assets. We do maintain a small cash position, not much, but this is to pay benefits. And what we'll do is we typically take money out of different investments to pay for the monthly benefits. But you'll see that $59 million is in common stock, corporate bonds of $7 million, et cetera, et cetera. I won't read it, for a total of $157 million in investments.
But this is the thing that's overstated by the amount of the drop liability. So are we going to?
For right now, because it's one and the same for presentation. We for financial presentation. I'm not saying for managerial presentation. So we'll probably have two columns next year. Pension drop in a total would be my recommendation. And then the statement of changes. So this takes this is not an income statement, but it shows the additions and reductions in the fund. So you'll see that the benefits were about $10 million. Administrative expenses were about $1.6 million. And then the change of negative $5 million. So the net depreciation of fair value of investments further up, negative $2 million was a big hit on the plan itself. So the next section I would like to...
What's in the administrative expenses?
That's all the fees that we pay the investment and the money managers and the Gallaghers of the world.
So if we went passive, we wouldn't be paying you.
You wouldn't be paying as much, but the returns wouldn't be as high in theory. That was and that was the conversation we had with DeHaab.
Yeah, I know.
So
one of the vendors that was bidding to be the manager.
Just real quick, there's two fundamental investment strategies. One's active management and one's passive management. Active management is when you hire different investment managers, be it in your equity portfolios, so you have a large cap, big stock owned companies, mid cap and small cap, bonds, all those are active managers. In theory, because they're actively managing your portfolio, they make more money. Versus a passive, which is more of a fund, mutual fund, is passive. You still pay fees, but you don't pay as high as a fee. And that's what we do with OPEB, the county program that we're in. That's a passive management. So the only managers that we really pay is the investment manager who selects the passive investments. So I'll be interested to see how we do compared to the two over a time period. But so that $1 million that we saw, $1.6 million, is the amount of money that we're paying the different entities to manage our funds.
Well, Ian and I had a nice day up in New York, and I was
But you paid for it. All right. Accounting, the notes to the basic financial statements start on page 30. Again, I think one of the most interesting sections in the, for me anyway, are the notes. It's the notes section that you're going to find a lot of detail relative to what we do.
Right. All the secrets.
All the secrets, all the dirty laundry, so to speak, and why we do what we do. So if you're going to spend any time after looking at the financial statements themselves, I would spend more time on the notes, because that's going to point you and have you understand. So it discusses the difference of the basis of accounting, governmental-wide, measurement focus. It gets under measurement focus under note 1. It talks about modified accrual basis versus the accrual basis of accounting. Again, it's just all the lingo that I tend to use. Hopefully, will be outlined here. Take a look at page 33, Ross. Your specific questions relative to the major proprietary funds, the water, sewer, off-street parking, transportation, and dock being rolled up. Then the non-major proprietary funds, which are shown in aggregated. Okay, are those, okay? So I didn't want to, but this is where it's at.
But if we do the right thing by stormwater management, it could become a major one, right?
Yeah. It's usually a percentage of your total budget. Then we talk about fiduciary funds, pension trust fund. Again, this was part of the conversation earlier during the union negotiations. The city's only internal service fund is used for coverage of general liability, workers' comp, and health insurance claims. So that conversation, I just want to note to it, because it's in the financial statements under accounting policies. You all know about the budgetary process, I trust. Significant accounting procedures continued, the budgetary control. Here, they show that the two departments that were over budget, police and fire, and then the non-allocated of 1.1. And I'm going to ask...
35.
Page 35. I can't read my handwriting. You want to talk to the $1.1 million?
The $1.1 million is actually pension benefit expenses that occurred after the material date per the valuation. So it's the auditor's adjusting entry, basically. That hits the general fund.
So then we get into more of the conversation of deferred outflows and inflows. We talk about property taxes. We talk about deposits and investments. What I would like to, just for a short time being, we talked about it, I think the last meeting, but we are going out and looking at different options, if you will, for money management, investment management. As yields start to increase, interest rates start to increase. Right now, as you can see here, the city maintains, essentially maintains our liquidity in the Maryland Local Government Investment Pool, also known as MLGIP. And with rates as where they are, it didn't much matter. But again, as rates are starting to heat up a little bit, we're going to be looking at a different strategy, laddering terms, looking at no equities or anything. It would be all in short investments, but trying to increase that yield a little bit. Once it's done, we'll pull together a primer, bring it to the to this committee and to the full board or the full council, so that they know what we're doing. But I think it's important, just as a sub-conversation. We talk about capital assets and depreciation. I think this is a good section because we don't spend a lot of time discussing, except for the capital improvement program, what our capital assets are. Then we talk about debt. I think we do spend a good fair amount of understanding with the debt, but this gets into a little bit more detail. If you take a look at page 43, it gets into debt ratios and where we are. Also, I think gives a little bit more detail relative to where we are in different debt classes. And then when you ask what's going to mature when, you can see the roll-off of that. Then we get into the pension plans, the Maryland, and then the city pension plan. I think we talked about that in pretty good. On page 49, it talks about the city or the single employer plan. That's the police and fire. We talked, I think that's it for the pension. For pension. And then if you take a look at page 56 on note 7, we get into other post-employment benefits. Just as a side note, 2 years ago now, we joined the county NACO OPEB, which has done a lot of good for the city. It's reduced the liability because now we can claim a rate of return, and I think overall it's providing what we expected. Interfund receivables, Melissa was talking about earlier. That's outlined on note 8, and the dissolution of the Dock and Market Enterprise Funds are also outlined in note 9. I know I'm kind of late speeding through this. And then we get into required supplementary information. We talk about, again, more pension liability relative to it says county proportionate share. It's the city's proportionate share to the state program. So it gets into different ratios here. Now I'd like to bring you to page 65. This is the score sheet relative to the different departments, revenues and expenditures.
by department, you'll see, and the revenues, and then you'll see how we did overall. And that concludes, everything else is combining statements, which are roll-ups to what you've seen. The only thing that I would like to bring your attention to is page 85. Page 85. If you haven't heard or didn't hear, there was a lot of discourse relative to the internal service fund for the health insurance. Both police and fire were somewhat concerned that something wasn't as transparent as it otherwise should be. Quite frankly, the reason that we started accounting for things in the internal service fund rather than the general fund itself was to provide the transparency. It's in its own, all the inflows and outflows are in its own fund. Whereas before, everything fell into the fund balance. If you were over or under, nobody knew. It was just part of the roll-up, and there was no accounting for it. Here we have all the revenues or sources of funds. So you have the employer share, the retiree share, the worker comp, all the different inflows and all the outflows, and then you'll see at the end of the year, net position is a negative $785,000. So that means that we spent more on claims than we received in payments. Now, some of that is workers' comp report. I mean, it's all pulled in, but we will be pulling out for years going forward, by health insurance, by workers' comp, by regular insurance, general liability, I should say, and then with a total come out here, so we can see exactly with the same inflows and outflows, what came in for health insurance, and for sources and expenditures, what came in for sources and expenditures on the workers' comp, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll have a very, I think, granular perspective relative to what it costs for our risk pools. And this is new this year. And that, I know there's more, but this is, you did have something to go over. Okay, so that pretty much provides an overview. The last section is more of, it gives some long-term perspective. I'm sorry.
Where did this negative 3.3 million come from? I'm back on page 85 trying to catch up with this. Because I see operating revenues of 13.5 million, and I don't see what what are the total expenses? Doesn't look like there should be a $3.4 million negative.
That's net position at the beginning of the year.
So income before contribution transfer is 2.6, and we had a negative 3.4, so we end up being netting out to.
Well, our total revenues were 13.4.
Right.
Our expenses were 10.4.
10.4 or 10.9?
Well, then, yeah, that's, okay, then rolling up to 10.8.
So that's where you get to that 2.6.
Right.
Right,
And
so
then-
that gets supplied to the starting balance to get us to a less negative.
Right, exactly.
All right.
Yep. And then, again, the statistical section, I think, provides some good historical perspective. But I won't go through each one of those schedules unless there's a desire to go through.
I've got some.
Ross, I just wanted to add, oh, sorry, Joe.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, if you look at page 26, going back to the statement of revenues, expenses, and change in that position, for proprietary, at the very last column is internal service fund, and it breaks it down just simply by revenues and expenditures. So this subsidiary schedule breaks it down by medical, workers' comp, general liability. Let me see where I am. 26. The very last column, you see net position at end of the year is negative 785, 498. Very last column, governmental activities, internal service fund.
Yeah, okay, so
Yeah.
there's the 3.4 and the
Yeah,
21.
yep.
Okay.
So it's just a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, a question in the statistical section. How did we pick up 185 miles worth of streets between 2013 and 2014?
What page are you on?
Page 100, middle of the page.
Page 100?
Well, I will tell you this, that we're going to have to get from Public Works. But we will get you an answer.
Who did we annex that we didn't know about?
It's Crystal Springs. It's Crystal Springs.
I think it's understood. Didn't we do an annex?
I think it's the Eastport Shopping Center.
Okay. Thank you for this presentation and walkthrough. I mean, I think those of us who've been on the council for a while have been looking at these every year when they come, and sort of, at least I'm willing to cop to, sort of flip through it and say, oh, that's kind of interesting, but to be able to put it in context and understand, sort of the relationship to the charge to the notes, and sort of be able to tie stuff back, I think is really helpful. So thank you for.
If there's one takeaway, if I may, I would like to, just, if we could do, like a recap after the budget and start managing it to it, I think that would be well served.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So any other questions or comments or thoughts on this?
Back on page 18.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the schedule. We meet tomorrow. The first department head meeting is Public Works. Obviously, David and whoever he brings have been through this dance before. We had some discussion before about whether we wanted to have set questions, or do we want to sort of bring questions. Obviously, we could use them as kind of the guinea pig for the other ones, since they won't start till next week. But what's your preference in sort of how to approach them with questions, or just certain questions that we want to make sure get asked?
One year we did have a set of questions, and we gave them to him ahead of time, and I thought that worked out pretty well, but I don't remember what the questions were.
Yeah, I think in this case, I mean, like I said, he's done this so many times, he's gonna cover those bases. But
Well, can't we just go back, maybe Cindy can find what we asked, I think there was like 3 or so questions that we asked them to be prepared to discuss. But the other thing that we said we definitely wanted to ask them for is, what are their enhancements? Since for the last several years, there have not been enhancements. And I know some departments where I want to see some enhancements. And I think it would be good to give them advance notice of what are the enhancements.
so, yeah, and I think we should definitely ask that tomorrow. I guess the question is, you didn't really answer, do we want to put together a list of questions we want to send out to them in advance, or do we want to just approach them as they come and make sure we cover whatever points everyone wants to make?
I think we need to approach them as they come.
I think we need to send out questions in advance.
No, I don't know what
It worked
questions in
very well
advance
when
I'm
we
gonna, all the questions I'm gonna have. There's no way of knowing that.
No, I know, but we had a set of, I think it was 3 basic questions that we asked them to come prepared to speak to. I don't remember off the top of my head, because I don't think we did that last year. I think it was
Yeah, it's been at
a
least.
couple of years before.
I don't remember having that.
Well, we can see if we can dig something up, and if not, we can recreate it going forward. I suggest we use tomorrow to figure out what those questions might be. I'll keep a log of what gets asked, and then before we go to the other department heads, we can see if there's some main ones we want to make sure they're prepared to ask. How about we do it that way?
Okay, but at a minimum, I think we should give them a heads up that we want to know about enhancements, because my understanding from several sources is they've been told they don't have enhancements.
And we got that sense from the city manager that if you don't ask for people for what their enhancements are, the enhancements don't exist, right?
Right.
The question is, if you were doing enhancements like we used to, what projects would you have and you put forward and why, right? I mean, that's the question for them. Yeah, I mean, I think they, as a technical thing, they don't exist because they were never requested, so. But I think that's where we should move the conversation to.
So they shouldn't be asked? for
You can
that?
ask them, I don't.
I mean, across the board, everybody come in?
Yeah, no, I think we should ask everybody, but
If you
I think
don't want
from.
to use that word, just don't use that word.
Yeah, I think from a technical point of view, they were not asked to turn in enhancement requests, right? So, and we know that, right? So the question is, what would be on that list if you had gone through that exercise the way you would have 2-3 years ago?
Just a matter of response to Alderman budget. First of all, I have to give kudos to Director Gerald, because he just notified us that there's 90 miles of road.
He's watching.
So he's watching.
So he's missing a mile.
That's right. But we'll reconcile the reports and source
Okay.
docs.
Mr.
Sure.
Chair,
But-
personal request. I'm not going to be able to be present on the 27th. And I don't know quite how the departments line up against the calendar anymore. I've lost picture of that.
Yes.
Okay.
But you can do a makeup, because we're going to try to get that in front of Financial Advisory Commission.
Okay.
So,
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Is that meeting tomorrow?
27.
It's been
The
rescheduled.
capital budget, yeah. Okay. Anything else?
No?
We get a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.